Welcome everyone to Rules Explained, Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader. In this episode, we're going over psychic powers and possibly mutations. I'm John Merritt.
I'm Rob Nothing.
And let's get started. So we've worked our way up to Psyonics, which I think is hilarious because they use the term Psyonics and they use psychic powers interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is kind of funny because down the line they just drop the term Psyonics and just use psychers.
And I think what they're trying to suggest is, as this is supposed to be a wide-ranging universe, that psychic powers, psionics, they even suggest that these might be spells according to some cultures. So they're trying to suggest that these are a wide, different variety of metaphysical abilities that cover the gamut of literature and storytelling.
See, I thought at the time, when this came out, it was the late 80s, and there was a lot of science fiction, and I just don't think they'd quite settled on which one they want to do yet. There was a lot of games that dealt with psionics, but no one really was dealing with psychic powers. I mean, it was just kind of I don't know, perhaps it was just a term thing at the time.
Yeah.
But it starts off.
That's probably true. Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, so if a model or a personality is a psychic, what does that mean? So we have a psychic mastery.
This is approximately where we're talking about the concept of level, which we find in various different games and itinerations of role-playing games. And it's a common concept to indicate your ability, your grasp of the powers, your experience with it. And it kind of corresponds in some ways to what we talked about in the last episode, where you're talking about heroes. And there's essentially, 4 different levels of heroes. You got your the basic dude, and then you got the champion, the minor hero, and the major hero. So it does correspond roughly to that concept of as you increase with your ability to survive and to grasp new situations and to master them, you increase in your ability in the game to do various powers, to do various effects, to inflict damage or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, in the psychic mastery, they talk about the different levels. They have the 4 different levels, mastery 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they actually give examples. And this is the first and only time I have ever seen the Emperor referenced to any form of ability. So your average, person who has beginning psychic powers is at a mastery 1. Then you have the Emperor of the Imperium as a mastery level of 4. Who has I
was going to say, I think this is, basically orc propaganda sneaking its way into the rulebook. I can't imagine that the emperor of the known human galaxy has a mastery level of 4.
Right, because he's allowing, Earthlings to travel through space because he's acting as a beacon.
Right, exactly.
So psychic levels. So we mentioned that there's 4 psychic levels, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Neat way of doing it that they give you just points, because I've never done this before, because in the modern games they just say you can cast or you can produce 2 of these, per turn, or 1, or so many per round. Here they say here's amount of points, spend them.
Yeah.
So like they say you have a mastery level of 1, you start with 10, 2, 20, mastery 3 at 30, at 4 you get 40, or you can have a random amount, I guess, depending upon the GM.
Yes, it's the typical thing about this version of 40K. The first version is that it allowed for quite a bit of randomness, so you never were exactly sure. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. You're talking about, again, a game that takes place in the backdrop of the entire galaxy. Are you going to tell me that every cycle you run across is going to have 10 psi level? Are you going to talk about every Marine has the same loadout of equipment? I mean, it just made a lot more sense to suggest that there might be quite a bit of randomness in all of these different attributes, as well as, loadouts and so on and so forth.
So the abilities that they start off by saying there are 40 different distinct psychic powers.
Mhm.
Number is limited by the character's intelligence characteristic to a maximum being of 10. So there's over 40, or no, there is 40.
Mhm.
And you can have a number of psychic powers equal to your intelligence.
Yep.
So if you have intelligence of 8 or 7, you get 7 or 8 different powers. You can pick some.
To a maximum of 10. Yep.
Okay. So there's no restrictions on that. You can pick from any field, any discipline.
The one restriction is your mastery level. Just like in many of the different role-playing games, a first level magic user can't cast third level spells. But unlike the D&D game, the levels match by number. So level 1 mastery means level 1 psychic powers, level 2, and so on and so forth.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Oops.
And by the way, just on the column right across from there, there's a very nice table that shows you the different powers that are available at each level.
Uh-huh. So at level 1, there's sort of resistance, cure injury, and they give you some examples of what they can do. Because a few of these I recognize. I mean, they've kept these all the way to 9th edition.
Mm-hmm.
Jinx. I recognize from an Eldar. That's pretty slick. I mean, I've never used these within a battle.
I use these in the role-playing version that I tried one time. I used Rogue Trader in its most pure sense as a role-playing game, and we did have some psychic powers being thrown around, but I don't believe I ever saw them in a battle. And if you take a look at the list, many of these don't really have a lot of battle use if you really want to go ahead and be honest. But again, this game was never intended to be a strictly war game. It was that hybrid, that kind of cross between the two different systems, between two different philosophies.
So the innate psychic abilities, what's that? And how's that different than just a psychic ability?
Well, I love this because I've always, and everybody who's played D&D in its original formats and AD&D before the third editions of the game and the fourth and the fifth and whatever else they go to, everybody was always upset with the limitations that magicians and other spellcasters had. In many games, in fact, if you played it by the book, first level magic user goes in there, casts his first spell, and he's done. He has no ability whatsoever, nothing that he can do magically until he rests for a day and memorizes his next spell, and then he casts that one spell and he's done. So what was very refreshing in this game is they said, no, a psychic has psychic powers that are innate that you can use repeatedly without worrying about, the cost, without worrying about reaching a maximum, without worrying about your level. So for example, a psychic can go ahead and pick up an object and see if it has any sort of psychic powers associated with it, or you might want to call this read magic or identify, depending on the version of D&D you're familiar with. And then the psychic awareness is again detect magic. The psychic can detect the psychic emanations if they spend a turn just sitting there focusing. So it was a very nice, very simple mechanic. I would have preferred that there would have been some point cost associated with it because that would have been more consistent with their idea of using points as a measure of psychic power. But hey, any referee would go ahead and decide that they wanted that or not in their game.
No, they got to have some points for psychic powers. I mean, I can't believe that would just be at no cost.
Well, the only restriction is you can only use one or the other each turn, and you can only use one per turn. But I mean, if you took this to there's a kind of extreme, I could go ahead and set up a line of stuff on a conveyor belt and just have it move very slowly and just have my psychic, put his hands on each one of them and see if, this is magical or whatever and move on. There was a little bit of a disconnect in my opinion with that part of it. But again, that's why the game has a referee. You might say that each one of these powers might cost, half a point or something like that, being consistent with Rogue Trader's obsession with fractions.
Okay, so how do I use a psychic power?
it is used just like anything else. You declare that your psychic is using the power and you pay the price in points. And if you have, and this is going to sound familiar too, if you have a certain amount of points, there's no need to roll. But once you start getting lower in your points, like for example, if you start having 11, 10, or 9 psychic points, now you have to actually roll 2d6 and score less than or equal to that. And that is why, if you take a look again at mastery level 1, the average psi level is 10, so that means you're not going to have any automatic powers. But if you're mastery level 4, you're going to be able to have automatic powers until the cows come home, because you're going to be able to use 28 points worth of powers before you even have to make any rolls to see if you succeed.
Okay, so then ideally every psychic power has a value that you have to get over.
Not quite. So for example, let's say I want to go ahead and cast an Aura of Resistance.
All right.
Aura of Resistance is a level 1 mastery and it costs 2 psi points. So if I'm a level 1 guy, I have 10 psi points to start with. I need a 10 or less to cast that successfully. And then I lose 2 psi points, which means the next time I try to cast that same spell or psychic power, I need an 8 or less.
Okay. So that's what the psi level is for. So if I had a mastery of 2, do I need to roll a 20 or more?
No, now that's great, because now that I have a 20, I can keep casting until I get down to 11 psychic points, and then I have to start rolling underneath that, because obviously on 2 dice, I don't have to worry about anything until I get down to 11. I can always roll 12 or less. So it's
Okay, so
2d6.
the Aura of Resistance says a psi points 2. So I start with 10 points. I cast it. I spend 2 points, right?
Right.
So that means in a game I can cast it 5 times.
Yes, but each time I cast it, because my psychic power is so low, I have to confirm that I can actually channel that energy. So I have to roll 2d6 and I have to score equal to or less than my current points.
Okay. Equal to or less than.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you have to spend the points and you have to roll.
Yep. If your psychic level is low enough, yes.
Okay, that makes sense. So there's a psychic save. So I've what's something that has an attack?
Well, you can probably look at mental blow.
Mental bolt. Yeah, there we go. So an individual suffering from a psychic attack may attempt to make a saving throw. The player rolls 2d6 for each model affected. If the score is equal to or less than the model's willpower, the ability has no effect. So it's the willpower of the person making the save. So the higher the willpower, the WP, the better chance he has of saving.
Now here's something crazy: the augmented save. Now, if I have some psi points left, some psi level points left, I can go ahead and add 1 for 1 to my willpower. So this is where your mastery level 4 does look rather impressive, because I have 40 psi points. If I have a model with a willpower of 10, all I have to do is go ahead and invest 2 points from my psi points, and I am invulnerable to psychic attack, essentially.
Wow. Yeah, I could see that. That's really powerful.
Yes, in fact, but now then you got the next rule, and everybody was thinking the same thing. Yes, now if I am the attacker, I can do 1 for 1 to go ahead and reduce your save. So it becomes kind of a battle of who has the most power. And of course, if I have 40 points versus your 10, eventually I'm going to overwhelm you and crush you.
This rule book threw me off, because I started reading it, and the way I'm accustomed to these books reading is, here's the turn, here's all the different phases, here's what you can do within the phases. I felt like that this book started to do that, and then they branched off. They got distracted with everything. I felt like all of this stuff is in the wrong place. The actual turn sequence, I felt like got lost somewhere in rules.
There was always, and when I created my own game, you may remember helping me playtest that game way back, ages. Ooh, slight plug, although it's not available. When we did that, we thought we were, geniuses creating a very clean, very easy system. But I realized just how difficult it was to create a presentation that seemed logical, because all the games throughout the 80s and 90s suffered from just what you said, that same malady, is that, what is the logical progression for which I should be addressing rules?
Sure.
Where do the rules go in the presentation of the rule book? And it was more difficult than I had thought. I thought, wow, these guys don't know anything. I said the same thing you did back in the 90s. And then I made my own book, got it printed, and then I handed it out, and the people were like, what? So it was a very powerful lesson to learn that the state of the art of game design was still many years away, and now we are in the 2020s, and we start to see, I think, a little bit more logic, a little bit more common sense as far as how rules are laid out. But then again, we're starting to see more minimalist systems too, which makes it easier. I mean, if all you're going to do is, like in the current games of Age of Sigmar, there's like really 4 pages of rules, right? And then everything else is, your unit cards or your indices or your codices or whatever the case may be.
Mhm. Yeah, in their ninth edition, now their ninth edition rules I really like, and the way they laid it out is really nice.
Yeah.
It's all keyword based, which simplifies a lot of things.
Yes.
It has this keyword, it equals this. Done.
Yes, and that's again that state of the art. Many people have figured out how to run games. I mean, anything from the game mechanics, like we were just talking about, this whole idea about being obsessive with the D6 and having all these, D6 plus another D6. Then I mean, all that stuff was clunky but fascinating when you first made the games. But then as game design progressed, people are like, oh, let's try to use a D10
Oh,
or
sure,
whatever
it
the case
changed
may
and
be.
evolved. Mm-hmm.
Right. But of course, 40K has not evolved completely because it still insists on the D6 for whatever reason.
I don't know why they have the D6. So resting and regaining side points. So if during a battle, a psyker during a round chooses to do nothing, he gets back 1 side point.
That's insane.
It is. I
That
could
was
never
one of
see
the
this be
first.
useful anywhere ever
Well,
during a tabletop game.
but here's where the wheels come off of this bus. If you're doing this in the traditional role playing sense, I can essentially say my psyker sits down and reads a magazine for 10 minutes and gets all of his psych points back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, talk about game and balance, because now you have an ability to go ahead and just use any psychic powers you want. You can do the enhanced attack, the augmented saves, and not worry about a thing, because all you have to do really is rest for, the equivalent of 2 minutes would regenerate all of master level 1 psychic points they spent, and then it just works geometrically from there. So that's where things fell off, and I think that was a mistake.
The intelligence and abilities. Now, here's where you had said, their intelligence equals the number of psychic powers they get. Now, they choose that before the battle, I'm assuming.
Or roll it randomly.
Or roll. Oh, yeah, I forgot. Yeah, they love their random tables.
Yes.
And the psychic engineering. What's that?
Well, in essence, you can go ahead and say you have psychic weapons. Now, this is a very familiar concept in 40K, but they've just eliminated the kind of story element behind it. But yeah, this is your force weapons. Some people might refer to them as lightsabers, I guess, although Star Wars purists might argue with me about the whole idea. But most of your, if not all your force weapons in 40K are weapons of psychic engineering.
So do they have to spend points for that?
Depends on the weapon, and it's all in the weapon description. Some of them have their innate reserves, and others require points to activate.
Okay. Then after that in the rule book, they have 3 pages of the psychic powers.
Yep.
And abilities. They have the point cost and all of that. They got some cool pictures. Then we move into Chaos 101. Chaos 098. Mutants. This section cracked me up because as I was building a slideshow for this and going over the notes, I like to go over the main categories, and they have the parent category of mutants, and then they have the subcategory creating mutants, and then they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages of how to create mutants and no other subcategories.
I want to go ahead and take a step back, if I may, to the to the psychic powers,
Sure.
and just mention one thing about level 4 psychic powers. There's a power called temporal distort, which is fascinating because you were talking about the turn sequence and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
Well, let's just go ahead and tell you that if I have a psychic and they have that ability, they can alter the turn sequence of any game turn that they want.
Temporal Distort is a 4th level, costs 12 psi points to cast. That's quite a
Which
bit.
which remember, I have 40. If I have chances are I have 40 psi points if I'm a level 4 mastery. I could have even more. I could have even 50. But yeah, go ahead.
But still, that's just over 1/4 of your entire pool.
Yep.
So it's a good amount of points. The Psyker can utilize his power to create a disturbance in the fabric of space, causing repetitions and negations of the stream time. A skillful individual can manipulate this to his advantage. Once this ability has been used, the Psyker player can alter the game sequence in any one of the following ways.
Check out the first one.
At the end of that turn, all the models on that side may repeat any one part of the turn sequence: moving, shooting, hand-to-hand, combat, or psionics. So he's saying if he casts this, that they can redo any of those.
Yep.
Wow. If repeating hand-to-hand combat, only models on the same side as the Psyker strike blows. Alternatively, during the enemy's next turn, the Psyker can cause all the models on that side to miss a part of that sequence. Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
If hand-to-hand combat is missed, the enemy may not strike blows, but the Psyker's own side still fights as normal.
Now
That is a powerful.
let's say you decide to go ahead and munchkin this someone out. And again, for all you grognards out there, you recognize that the original phrase munchkin applied to Steve Jackson when when he was doing various power guides to gaming. He would find holes in rules and then tell you how to exploit them. But the long and the short of this is if, let's say, I have 36 psychic points, if I really wanted to go ahead and make this a miserable thing, I could go ahead and repeat for my side the same 3 turns in a row and just pummel my enemy. If I was an orc psyker and we were in melee combat, I could go ahead and have 3 melee faces in a row. If I, it just is, it's kind of crazy. Well, I guess you couldn't have 3 melee in a row, but you get where I'm going with this.
Sure, yeah, I mean,
Is
ideally, he can cast this and they would do another melee round. Now, I guess depending upon how many times he can cast this or summon this per turn. I mean, can you do this multiple times or is this just once per turn?
You can do it once per turn, but the limiting factor would be, of course, you have to choose one of the psychic phases or one of the movement phases or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, now that I think about it, no, no, you can only repeat it once. If you were trying to go, you could go ahead and munchkin this one out too much, because now that I've read the rule more carefully, it does say you can only repeat one of these phases. So if I repeat the psionic phase, I won't be able to go ahead and have my orc troops do another melee phase. I just get another psychic phase, which would
Mm-hmm.
make sense to keep doing a psychic phase just so I can keep doing temporal distort for myself.
And spending 12 points each time you do it.
Right. Now, on the other hand, if I had a psyker with me, oh, I just thought of that. That would work. If I had a psyker with me as my companion,
Uh-huh.
I would go ahead and do temporal distort after that psyker cast whatever spell he wanted, and then I would cast my temporal distort, which means that caster next to me can cast another spell. I would cast temporal distort again. Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! What a hack!
It is, however, but if he can only cast this once per turn,
Right,
it's not,
but I
a
can
perpetual engine.
no, but I can. But because I'm repeating the turn, that means every turn that I'm repeating, I can do this spell, this psychic power.
Right, but you have to spend 12 more points each time to do it, right?
That's the limiting factor, right? So eventually I'm going to run out of psychic energy, but it's still very fascinating that I can go ahead and have 3 or 4 psychic turns in a row. And
Yeah.
if I have a companion next to me who's unleashing his psychic powers, holy crap.
Yeah, this has got to cost points somewhere. Because I
Yeah,
mean,
it does. But, we can get the point cost later on. But yeah, the point cost, and just like you said, that's all addressed at the last part of this rule book. And basically, to make a long story short, you're going to be paying the equivalent of a couple of squads of infantry to go ahead and have a level 4 psyker.
I came across something I wanted to show you. Let me
Mhm.
flip this out. Of course, now I can't find it. There it is. On Bell of Lost Souls, they have a never forget the first Ultramarines librarian.
Really?
I've got it up on a shared
Yeah.
screen if you want to see
Yeah.
it. And this guy had found an old white dwarf from 1988. It was White
Uh-huh.
Dwarf number 97. He says,
Okay.
enter the original Ultramarines chief librarian.
Okay.
Does that
There's
not
this. There's this.
scream Rogue Trader?
Yeah, that is definitely Rogue Trader right there. There's nothing to say that it is not. You got the classic profile, 181 and a half
Yeah,
points.
and a
That's
half.
insanity.
Ilion
Um,
was born to a human mother on the world of Badab. Following the expulsion of the tyrant there in 912 of the current millennium, his father was an unknown Eldar mercenary. Let me repeat that. His father was an unknown Eldar mercenary. The youngster was gene tested at birth in accord with the law and subsequently taken into imperial custody. He was reared in the government compound by the imperial mission, which took over the running of Babad after the war.
by the way, there's a reference to Macrage in the very last section of that second paragraph. So
Oh yes,
there's that continuity with the original storylines. Yeah, if you want to
but
scroll a little bit more,
but
I'd be very interested to see what his mastery level is.
well, he's got a chapter badge here, and he eventually takes over as a chapter master.
Uh,
So if you scroll down, yeah, he's actually right here
okay.
in the Ultramarines. But what kills me, he's a half elf
Yeah, essentially, yeah, you're right.
in the xenophobic, Imperium, and he's a leader. He's like a chapter master. Um, I mean, that's all they really give on him.
Oh, okay. There's not much, but yeah, that's a very rogue trader profile there for certain.
I just love these I really do love these old models. I just love the beaks. I
Yes.
love the dimples on the shoulder pads. I just think those are
Yep.
really cool.
The if I remember the original lore right, um, that was a measure of your battles. If I remember correctly, your campaigns.
Oh, was it?
If I remember correctly, I may be mistaken on that. I might be mixing that up with the um, with the rivets that people put in their foreheads for surviving various campaigns.
I thought that was for the years of service that they're in. Like
Yeah,
every 10 years, they got a bolt in the head or something.
exactly. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the paint schemes are very straightforward. I remember you and a couple other people talking about painting, Marines and how it's relatively complex. And I was thinking to myself, not when I was painting Marines. I basically gave them a coat of white, put some gold here and there, and I was done. I could paint a whole section of Marines, a whole squad of Marines, in about 15 minutes. But of course, they didn't look great as models do today. But if you look at the paint schemes that you're showing me, those that's a very straightforward. Here we go. We got some sort of bluish. We got the white highlights and the gun metal, and then we're done. I mean, those probably took all of. What do you think? What do you think? How long would it take you to paint that stuff? Not the
That
basic.
nowadays,
Yeah.
what, the whole unit or just a
Yeah,
model?
the whole unit. How long would it take you to make that whole unit just with
Oh,
that
I
basic
could
paint scheme?
probably do that in a couple nights, maybe
Yeah,
two,
I
three
mean,
hours.
yeah, that's pretty straightforward stuff. And that's what I loved about it. Again, it's just the game was accessible, I think I would say.
I
You
mean,
know,
but painting, even from 1988 to the year 2020 has changed a lot.
Yes.
With the advent of shading, with highlighting, the blending of the colors of the dark color, the mid range, the high point, and the highlights. It's really evolved over the years, decades. I mean, I painted a Space Marine. It took me 4 hours to do one Space Marine.
Yeah, and then that's what I'm saying is that it's become a very big part of the hobby now, and I am not discrediting it, nor am I saying it's wrong. I'm just suggesting that the hobby has definitely taken an interesting turn.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter a lot. I'm on Instagram a lot, and I watch these guys. Man, the stuff they put out is just absolutely amazing. I'm just blown away by what they're able to do. I feel like a kindergarten with watercolors next to these guys. These guys are painting out murals on flags. And, I saw they just came out with giants. And I watched a guy, he posted his picture. It looked like real skin. I don't know how he did it. Absolutely amazed by it.
That's cool.
Anything else?
No, I just want to make sure that we didn't gloss past that because I don't know if they have anything like that today, ninth edition, but I'm going to suggest they probably don't.
Well, guys, that is our show for tonight. Next week, we're going to be going over mutations, or Chaos 98, as I like to call it. Let me pull this up real quick. There we go. Again, you can find us on Facebook.com/slash Rules Explained. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Again, I'd like to thank Ethan Peebles for the music. Did a fantastic job. I think that's all I got. I'm John Merritt.
I'm Rob Nothing.
Guys, thank you for listening.
Adios.